In January 1983, the discovery of a young woman's skeletal remains led New Jersey detectives to the door of Richard Biegenwald, a serial killer with a very specific choice of victims.
Dark hair, dark eyes, and darker skin. These are the attributes which brought Biegenwald to his thrill killings.
When investigators scratched the surface, they found Biegenwald not only killed for pleasure, he also had a long list of victims he murdered for money.
Biegenwald was a mob enforcer, a killer for hire.
Biegenwald began his murderous career aged just 17 years old. He would go on to kill at least 6 people, though some believe his tally of victims is much higher.
It was like if he said, I'll kill you, you had to believe if he got a chance, he was going to kill you.
He was a cold-blooded killer. He had no remorse. He was a sociopath.
A man happy to kill for any reason, or for no reason at all. Richard Biegenwald has earned the title of one of the world's most evil killers. In 1983, when the full extent of Richard Biegenwald's crimes were reported across the United States, the public was horrified.
It was like no matter what you did, you turned the TV on, you turned the radio, it was Richard. Because we had never had anything like that before.
As well as committing a long list of murders, Biegenwald, along with an accomplice, appeared to be planning to carry out even greater atrocities.
They had a Mac semi-automatic weapon, but they were engineering cigarette lighters to be .22 caliber handguns. They had bombs. They had date rape drugs and some sedatives.
What possibly could have, happened with the bombs? What was happening the next week that we didn't know about?
This wasn't the kind of guy who wanted to get caught. This was the kind of guy who was just going to keep going regardless. You catch me when you catch me, and if you kill me, you kill me. That kind of a person, what I would describe as a real psychopath.
This killer's story begins on Staten Island, New York.
Richard Biegenwald was born in August of 1940 to Albert and Sally Biegenwald, a couple that, to say the least, was dysfunctional.
He didn't have a good childhood. His father had a leg amputated. He was a drinker and was an abusive both husband and father.
Author John O'Rourke has delved deep into Biegenwald's troubled background. His problems started when he was still just a baby.
As a small infant, he was doing unusual body movement, if you will, stopping and just staring momentarily. Just odd behavior patterns that, as time went on, indicated to them that there was definitely a problem.
He was diagnosed with schizophrenia kind of before he was even a teenager, and that's really unusual.
Another attribute that he had was a fascination with death from early on. He just didn't fit in. He was very impulsive. He actually set himself on fire as a kid. I believe he was eight when he set himself on fire.
The young Biegenwald also displayed another worrying trait, abusing animals.
His fascination with hurting animals and death ultimately increased to the point where they brought Richard to Belleville Hospital in New York, a psychiatric center, trying to seek help.
Richard spent his childhood in institutions designed to help him find a way in the world to keep to the straight and narrow. They did exactly the opposite.
Attorney Lou Diamond, who represented Biegenwald as an adult, believes the treatment the young child was given made his problems worse, not better.
They gave him electric shock therapy to an 8-year-old and then threw cold water on him naked and let him sleep on an iron table at night. And he'd have to urinate on himself to stay warm, an 8-year-old. And we asked, where do these people come from? We make them. And in those days, it was unknown what it could lead to. And what it led to was Richard. They took the young boy out of him far too early.
This was a person who had problems from the beginning. If we overlay that with the abuse in the home as well, and overlay that again with some of the treatments, the electroconvulsive therapy treatments that he had, this guy was never going to be a functioning adult.
As time moved on and he got older, his behavior pattern increased. Well, he was starting to get involved in some criminal activity. He was breaking into cars, stealing things, started smoking at an early age. And rumor has it that he was even drinking before he was 10. He was consuming alcohol, maybe mimicking his father.
In 1957, 16-year-old Biegenwald was living back with his mother on Staten Island. It soon became clear he was far from a reformed character.
He dropped out of school and started stealing things, stealing cars, and committing crimes.
He went down to Tennessee and he stole a car and brought it into Kentucky or vice versa. And he did almost a year in a reform school.
When he was released, once again, Biegenwald's offending drastically escalated. In December 1958, Biegenwald and a teenage accomplice entered a grocery store in Bayonne, New Jersey. By the time they walked out, the owner was dead.
The first victim was Stephen Slodowski, a store owner, an entrepreneur who was a lawyer and a prosecutor in town, well-respected individual. I think he walked in to the store with the intent of actually killing him. And that's exactly what he did. He walked into the store with the sort of shotgun. What conversation took place, we don't know. But what we do know is he shot him with the shotgun and then fled the store. And he decided to flee. And he fled south. I don't know necessarily if he had a destination in mind other than getting as far away from Bayonne and Staten Island as he could.
Along with his accomplice, who thought he was simply taking part in a grocery store robbery, Biegenwald went on the run from the police.
Went through Delaware, had a shootout in Delaware, went to Maryland, they had a shootout there, and eventually he got shot in the face.
The story Richard told me was that when they came to arrest him and track him down, it was like surreal. It was snowing a little bit, and they had him surrounded with shotguns and everything, and he had his gun, and he was telling himself, what should I do? And he was considering letting them shoot him.
This is a guy who's not invested in what the world has to offer him at all. He's just gonna do what he wants to do. He's got no respect for the world or its rules. I would question whether he even had that much respect for his own mortality. And it was inevitable, really, I suppose, that he was going to start killing people.
At just 18 years old, Richard Biegenwald had committed his first murder. He pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
The first few years in prison were problematic. He had to defend himself, let it be known not to mess with him. He not only survived, he thrived there. As time went on, he realized that he does have a possibility for parole. It's time to start complying, start showing that you are capable of being reintroduced into society.
Turns himself into the perfect prisoner. A model prisoner. He's everybody's friend. Gets on well with his fellow inmates, and in 1975, he's released. Well, the world is his oyster.
He returned to Staten Island. His mother was living on Sharrett's Road in Staten Island, so he was living with his mother. And immediately he was able to pick up some labor work, painting, some mechanic jobs. Now, Staten Island is known for a community that is rich in organized criminal activity. And it is believed that he somehow caught the eye of an organized crime network.
He was working odd construction jobs and also doing collection work for people. I believe he would have been a very good collector. When you owe money to a bookmaker or somebody like that and you don't pay, you didn't have to look at his body. You looked in his eyes and you knew you should pay.
If the rumors were true, Biegenwald was willing, even happy, to do whatever dirty work his criminal bosses asked of him.
One might be said that he was for hire. I would think mostly to make sure the problem disappeared.
It was work that suited Biegenwald's ruthless nature and his taste for extreme violence.
He always used 22s because, with or without silencers, because the bullet would rattle around in the person's head. He would go and pick up hookers or drug dealers in Newark and test out new guns and silencers on them and back alleys. They have these trash cans in New York City, heavy wrought iron with holes in them and everything. And he loved chopping people up. And he would put the body parts in there and wire the tops and then throw them off a boat in the Jersey Sound and let the crabs eat them.
He was so devoid of empathy. I think that made him incredibly dangerous.
In 1978, Lou Diamond got a call to represent Biegenwald, who was in jail, accused of rape.
So I went down to the courthouse to meet him in the jail cells for the first time. And he was a unique-looking person. He had blondish red hair, and he had these piercing blue eyes, that just looked right through you.
Right away, his attorney realizes this is a man who is highly intelligent. So he turns to Biegenwald and he says, "You have a very interesting hair color. Oh, and by the way, we're having a lineup tomorrow." And he walks out of the jail cell.
We got to court the next day and everybody was yelling and screaming. I went downstairs and he was bald.
Ultimately leading to him not getting picked out of the lineup. And he gets released back into society.
Biegenwald's female victim was denied justice, and for several years he dropped off the radar of law enforcement.
In 1980, Biegenwald meets a much younger woman, Diane, whom he marries, and they move to Asbury Park in New Jersey.
Famous for its music, culture and liberal politics, Asbury Park was an unlikely home for a convicted killer. For a couple of years, Biegenwald did not attract the attention of the police, but that did not mean he wasn't committing crimes. In fact, his taste for brutality seemed to know no bounds.
In January of 1983, two kids are playing in an abandoned lot adjacent to a Burger King parking lot. During their little adventure going into this parcel of land, they discover a body, decayed by then, basically. Skeletal remains with some clothing. Interesting, no shoes.
I was the detective on duty. My captain sent me out there to take charge of the crime scene.
Kevin Quinn was the first person to examine the female body.
She had a black shirt on and jeans. And the body was face down with her arms kind of outstretched, her feet kind of outstretched, and the hair had kind of fallen down around the skull some. And then we moved the hair just a little bit, and I remember seeing the first hole, and you can't mistake it. It was a bullet hole. We actually found, when we picked up the skull, we could hear the spent rounds inside the head cavity.
The medical examiner concluded the young woman had been dead for several months and confirmed what detectives already knew. She had been brutally murdered, shot several times in the back of the head at close range. There was nothing on the body to identify who this murdered woman was, but within a day or so, investigators had their answer.
It gets reported in the paper, a description of the woman with her clothing. A local police officer by the name of Mike Dowling, sipping his cup of coffee, reading his newspaper, and he noticed the article, and the victim had no shoes. And that drew him back to the summer before, August of '82, where he had been summoned to a missing persons case, a woman named Anna Oslowitz, who went missing on the Asbury Park boardwalk.
She had come to the boardwalk with a friend, and they were at the boardwalk together. The friend had to go, I guess she had to use a bathroom, at which point she left Anna there at the boardwalk and went to this place to use the bathroom. And when she got back, Anna was missing. She was gone.
It was around Labor Day, so the beach was still utilized. It was still warm enough, and they were walking around, and they must have been on the beach and stuff. Maybe that's why she didn't have her shoes on.
We got dental records, and sure enough, the dental records matched Anna Lesowitz.
The police had identified their 18-year-old victim, but that was all they had at this stage of the investigation.
We had no suspects. We had nothing, really, other than a body with a skeleton with 3 holes and 3 bullets. We had no motive.
In this case, there was no sign of sexual assault. Where do you start? What's the motivation for this murder? Most people are murdered by somebody they know. But in a case like this, it's quite possible that it was somebody that they didn't know. So that makes it even more difficult. If there's no relationship between the victim and the killer, the police are at a huge disadvantage.
For the next 7 days, detectives searched for clues in the hopes of cracking the case. Then a witness came forward with an incredible story to tell.
A young lady came into the police department by the name of Teresa Smith. Teresa Smith said she had something to tell us about the homicide involving Anna Lesowitz.
Teresa started laying out this story about this guy named Richard Biegenwald, who liked going hunting on the boardwalk and finding victims.
She knew that Richard had killed a girl and that he had actually shown her the body.
Teresa told detectives that about a year earlier, she'd become friends with a co-worker, Diane Biegenwald. Diane introduced Teresa to her husband, Richard, and the two had embarked upon an unconventional relationship, with Teresa moving into the couple's apartment.
Have this extraordinary ménage. There's no doubt that not only was Richard married to Diane, but that Teresa had a relationship with Richard. They were much younger than he was, a man in his early 40s, they're in their 20s. He represented something exciting, out of the ordinary, indeed, in many ways, dramatic. So you can sort of see how that might have been quite intoxicating.
Biegenwald had been trying to groom Teresa to take part in his killings. The night Anna went missing, Biegenwald lured her off the boardwalk with marijuana. He drove Anna, the victim, who was still, we believe was still alive, to the apartment in Asbury Park. He goes into the house and he goes up to the bedroom, to Teresa's bedroom, and wakes her up. He wants her to help in killing Anna. And Teresa, probably in a sleep-induced coma, couldn't get herself up out of bed. She does remember staring out the window and seeing a female figure in the car.
The next morning, Teresa discovered that Biegenwald had done what Teresa refused to. He'd murdered Anna Lesowitz.
Biegenwald took Teresa to see her body in the shed behind their apartment block. And to touch it, he said, you touch the body, see what it feels like. And the body also had a ring, black and gold ring, which he subsequently took off the body and gave to Teresa. Teresa moves out, horrified by this sight of the body, starts a relationship with somebody else. They go away on holiday, and when they come back in January 1983, 5 months after she's moved out, there's the news of the discovery of Anna's body behind the Burger King. She is physically sick.
And she knew that that was the victim that she was shown in the shed, that Biegenwald wanted her to touch. Logically concluding that the only witness connecting Richard Biegenwald to Anna Ulleswitz was Teresa Smith. She panicked. She knew that time wasn't on her side. She realizes, oh shoot, he's going to kill me.
Teresa's story was compelling, but was any of it true? Officers needed to investigate.
We do a background check and find out who this guy is. You know, we find out he's had previously done time for murder.
Teresa had told detectives of seeing Anna Ulleswitz sitting in the passenger seat of Biegenwald's car just before he murdered her. A couple of days later, Biegenwald had abruptly sold the car. When Kevin Quinn tracked it down, it told a story of its own.
I could see up in the headliner of the car blood splatter and actually holes from one of the rounds that probably went up in the headliner of the car. There was blood on the seat that they had cleaned in detail in the car for sale. Not quite perfect enough.
After confirming the details of Teresa's wild story, detectives were sure that Richard Biegenwald had murdered Anna Ulleswitz. Teresa also told them that Biegenwald may not have been working alone. He had an accomplice who lived in the same building.
Darren Fitzgerald was a friend of Richie Biegenwald's. They met in prison. But when Darren got out, he looked Richie up. They then moved to Asbury Park, and there was 4 or 5 apartments in this address, and Darren took another apartment in there, so they were living together. They were friends.
Darren Fitzgerald is a very strong figure, a very masculine man, has violent tendencies. If not for Biegenwald, I'd say he was the leader. But Biegenwald was that strong of an imposing figure.
When the Asbury Park police looked into his background, Fitzgerald appeared to be a loyal foot soldier with a predilection for violence.
Fitzgerald, a lot of his reputation, although he was involved in some criminal stuff and he did some serious jail time involving weapons and guns and violent crime, was a little bit of bluster where Biegenwald was not. To Biegenwald, Fitzgerald was a reliable co-worker, if you will. Someone who could be depended upon, someone that would keep his mouth shut.
These were the men detectives suspected of murdering 18-year-old Anna Ulleswitz. Their intelligence painted a picture of 2 ruthless killers who had to be stopped. On the 22nd of January 1983, Detective William Lucia and his team prepared for a high-stakes raid on Biegenwald's and Fitzgerald's home.
We were told that there was a lot of dangerous items in the house by way of firearms and bombs and snakes. And so we knew that it was a risky situation.
Once the police know this, they have to have a plan to make sure that they're not walking into literally a trap. And so they have to find a way of getting Biegenwald out of the house unarmed so that they can arrest him.
They dressed up one of the detectives and they put him in the backyard of Biegenwald's house. And the detective knocked on Biegenwald's door and said, you know, we found this guy, he's a prowler.
And myself, other detectives, we hid beyond the house next door, and he's like all confused. And that was probably just enough to get him to take 1 or 2 steps out the door onto the porch, and we all just pounced on him. And we had him up against the wall, handcuffed him, and then dragged him down the driveway and put him in a Asbury police car.
With one of the men suspected of murdering teenager Anna Ulleswitz in custody, it was time to track down Biegenwald's alleged accomplice, Darren Fitzgerald. and to find out if Teresa Smith's claims about this house of horrors were true.
We had been tipped off to the fact that Fitzgerald had built a little room in his apartment with a two-way mirror that he could hide in. So we went in the house, basically. I went through the door and I saw the mirror.
And we kept pulling on the mirror from the bottom because it was like you could see it was hinged on the top. When they were pulling, you could almost see like somebody was hanging on to the other end of it. Fitzgerald was inside there, and he had, I know, one rifle, but maybe more weapons in there. They had actually marijuana plants and stuff and other stuff in there too. There was like 25 or 30 of these bombs in there, all fused up and ready to go. And then they had, obviously, tons of guns and a submachine gun, and it had Teflon bullets that they had coated themselves, which would defeat a bulletproof vest.
Darren Fitzgerald was quickly disarmed and cuffed. When Detective Quinn and his team of crime scene officers moved in to scour the property, there were even more grisly surprises awaiting them.
And as we went inside the house, went through the kitchen into the living room, there's a big gaping hole in the living room floor, and that's where Biegenwald had his bedroom in the basement.
We found a lot of guns, a couple of explosive devices, a poisonous snake. We found a ring, which we believed to have been Anna Lesowitz's ring, which we confirmed later. We found a gun that ballistically later on turned out to be the murder weapon on Anna Lesowitz.
They had knockout drops, chloral hydrate, and then of course you turn around and there's a big aquarium with this puff adder looking at you.
African puff adder, one of the most poisonous snakes in the world.
As they continued to search the bizarre arsenal, detectives began to piece together the deadly plans Biegenwald and his associate had been making.
And they discover this arsenal of weaponry, plus a notebook. And the notebook contains all manner of details about individual targets, about the plan of the shopping mall they intended to attack, a pipe bomb, and how they might use it.
They also had something called DMSO. And I know DMSO is dimethyl sulfoxide. And whatever you mix with that will absorb through the skin. But I see the snake, I see that they're milking the venom, because I recognized they had a jar with a cellophane or something over the top, and teeth bite marks from the snake. And I said, oh my God. What they were gonna mix DMSO, the snake venom, which would make you die real quick, and paint it on the ear pieces of payphones. And then sit in the boardwalk and watch people keel over, I guess, after they talk.
There was an address with some numbers. It was the chief judge of the state of New Jersey's parking spot at his country club.
Gosh, thinking about the danger that Biegenwald poses to society, huge, massive, massive. Nobody would want to come in this guy's eye line and potentially become the next target.
Richard Biegenwald and Darren Fitzgerald had both been arrested on suspicion of murdering 18-year-old tourist Anna Lesowitz. But if cops were hoping for a confession from Biegenwald, they would be waiting a long time.
We arrested him, and that was it for a while. He would not talk. Nobody was giving us any information. I had suspected that Anna Lesowitz wasn't the only person this guy killed. I mean, you just don't all of a sudden just kill somebody that you don't know.
Days after his arrest, Biegenwald's accomplice, Darren Fitzgerald, decided to talk. And what he told James Fagan proved the prosecutor right. Anna was not Biegenwald's only victim. There were many, many more.
So Darren Fitzgerald comes forward and says, if I give you the locations of a few bodies that I helped Biegenwald dispose of, can we drop the charges of murder? Because I had no involvement in her death other than helping dispose of the body.
And that started very many days, weeks, and months of going to different places and digging up and finding other bodies.
One of the victims Fitzgerald told the cops about was 34-year-old William Ward, who'd been killed in September 1982. The murder weapon had been found during the search of Biegenwald's basement bedroom.
Ward was just a drug dealer who really had no dealings with Biegenwald.
Ward had gone to the house in Asbury Park and met up with Darren Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald and him got into an altercation, at which point Biegenwald came out of the house with a gun and shot him in the head 5 times.
Fitzgerald helped Biegenwald dispose of William Ward's body, I believe in the cemetery.
Fitzgerald led us to that body, and we were able to locate it and actually recovered the body of Ward.
As they are preparing their case and still figuring out how many bodies there are, they realize that besides William Ward, a local criminal comes forward and says, I know Richard Biegenwald killed another person at an abandoned airport in Flemington, New Jersey, a man by the name of John Petrone.
Petrone was an associate who Biegenwald found out he was a state police informant and asked him to go out target shooting one day and shot him in the head.
We did dig up part of John Petrone in the state game lands. He was missing his lower mandible.
Very quickly, Fitzgerald had helped Asbury Park police tie Richard Biegenwald to 3 unsolved murders: Anna Olesowitz, William Ward, and the 1978 killing of John Petrone. And as investigators kept digging, they were sure that they were barely scratching the surface. They were building a picture of a man who killed when business matters demanded it, but also to feed his own twisted needs.
Which makes him different than the average serial killer. The profile is different because in addition to his thrill killings, he had this criminal connection that was almost businesslike. And the thrill killings were his relaxation, if you will.
Through the spring of 1983, with Biegenwald in custody, detectives were horrified to discover the full extent of his murderous spree.
I had asked them to pull missing persons, and specifically young girls, in either the Ocean County or the Monmouth County area. And sure enough, there were a couple of girls that were just gone from Ocean, and then there was another girl that was gone from Monmouth.
Cold cases are really, really difficult for police. Don't know who the killer is, don't know what their motivation was, don't even know if they had any relationship at all with the victim. And you've got to go back however many months, years that victim has been dead and try and recreate their last movements. Incredibly difficult.
The first of these missing persons cases linked to Biegenwald was that of 17-year-old Betsy Bacon, who disappeared in November 1982.
She was from Seagirt. I suspect she was hitchhiking, and he picked her up. Betsy Bacon's body was found in Tinton Falls.
Fitzgerald had described that Richie Biegenwald had killed this girl, asked him to help him get rid of the body. So he led us to that area, which we went to, and believe it or not, we spotted a hand coming out from the dirt.
Detectives also linked another homicide cold case to the man they had in custody, 17-year-old Virginia Clayton, who'd vanished in the autumn of 1982 after heading to a beach town just down the coast from Asbury Park.
She went missing in September. Her body was found only 3 days later. However, there was no connection to Richard Biegenwald at that time. It wasn't until after he was arrested and the body's coming in that the authorities were able to piece together the profile of these thrill killings time frame where Richard Biegenwald was and the likely victims. Virginia was one of his victims.
It was just terrible, you know. And then to deal with the parents, you know, it's just a heartbreak, you know. It really is.
The roster of Biegenwald's victims was getting longer by the day. Then Darren Fitzgerald asked to meet prosecutor James Fagan once again. And Biegenwald's accomplice was armed with another bombshell.
So I sat down with Fitzgerald, and he says, you know, 2 bodies are in his mother's backyard in Staten Island. He said, well, one, I came home one time and Biegenwald had chopped this girl up and put her in plastic bags and wanted my help in burying her in his mother's backyard. I helped him dig a hole, and when I'm digging it, there was another body there in plastic bags, also cut up.
We went out to the house and we executed our search warrant, and we dug where he alleged that the bodies were, and yes, we did find those 2 bodies.
I had suspected who they were, but we had to get identification. Took them to the New York Medical Examiner's office.
Detectives went back to the list of missing teenage girls from the early 1980s after Biegenwald had moved to the Jersey Shore.
There was a Deborah Osborne and a Maria Chialella, who I won't forget that because I used to have a picture of her on my desk.
Maria went missing in November of 1981. Deborah went missing in April of '82.
These women, these young women, were not sexually assaulted. They were simply shot in the head. It's horrifying, genuinely, that they were entirely innocent victims of a man who wanted to kill.
Detectives realized there was a strong physical resemblance between all of Biegenwald's teenage victims and his former girlfriend, Teresa Smith, who'd brought about Biegenwald's downfall when she went to the police months earlier to implicate him in the murder of Anna Elesovitz.
18 to 22, somewhere around that age range, dark hair, brown eyes, very attractive, petite, that he would target. And somehow, some way, that was probably connected to Teresa because she was a living, breathing girlfriend of his that looked very familiar to his victims.
Now linked to 7 cold-blooded killings, Richard Biegenwald wasn't talking to the cops. Facing the death penalty if convicted, he asked his mother Sally to contact attorney Lou Diamond and beg him to save Biegenwald's life.
She told me, nice lady, that Richard had been arrested, put the news on. And Richard had been arrested for a murder. So I agreed to go to Trenton State Prison to interview him. They were going for the death penalty, which was in existence then. So there was no plea offer.
A conversation takes place between Biegenwald and his attorney. If I give up a number of bodies, will they take the death penalty off the table? The number was suggested at anywhere between 25 bodies that he would give up to 75. Ironically, the man who took all these lives and the man who had this fascination with death now is looking at the death penalty. And he doesn't want the death penalty. So he's in fear of death, something that he had been fascinated with his whole life.
Basically, Richard's position was he wasn't lying down for anybody. You know, he'd done enough time in jail to know that nobody respected you.
So they come forward with that. We're going to give you these bodies, take the death penalty off the table. And that offer was turned down. The prosecutor's office was secure in the fact that they had enough evidence, hard evidence, to secure convictions on him that they would put him away for years, without a doubt.
With the death penalty still on the table, Richard Biegenwald pleaded not guilty as his trial began at Monmouth County Superior Court.
When Biegenwald goes on trial on the 28th of November 1983, part of the evidence against him His forensics discovered by the police in his car. And the police also had, for the prosecution, the evidence of Darren Fitzgerald, who turned against his, quote, sorcerer, and Teresa Smith, who'd done the same thing. A very powerful case.
Well, I first became aware of the death of Anna Lesowitz not by name, but by actually seeing her body.
Hardly surprisingly, Biegenwald is found guilty of the killing of Anna.
In February 1984, Richard Biegenwald was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the murder of Anna Lesowitz.
Didn't even blink an eye. Went in the back. He said, all right, what do we do now? Yeah, we both knew what was going to happen.
He showed nothing. I mean, it was blank. You know, it's just, he didn't care.
Biegenwald's next court appearance, also in February 1984, was for the murder of petty drug dealer William Ward.
The William Ward trial was in Mount Holly. I traveled there to testify, pretty much told the same story. Talked about the bombs, the this, the snake.
What area is this? Okay, this is the basement bedroom area under of Mr. Biegenwald.
That trial, he was obviously found guilty too, and then that was it. He pled to the other ones.
In September 1984, Biegenwald pleaded guilty to the murders of 17-year-old Maria Chialella and Deborah Osborne. After a series of legal wrangles, his death sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole. With prosecutors lacking concrete evidence, Biegenwald was never charged in connection with the deaths of Virginia Clayton and John Patrone, and efforts to get him to confess to any further murders came to nothing.
Mike Dowling, who was an investigator in the prosecutor's office at the time, and myself, we took a ride to Trenton State Prison. Michael and I were sitting at a table, and I remember Michael looking at me and, oh, it got cold in here. Turn around, and Richard's coming in. He says, what do you want? And I said, I'll tell you what we want, and I'll be very right out there and say, I want to know where you put these other bodies. You'll never be charged with any of these crimes. I simply want to put to rest these families. I mean, you know, there's people out there looking for people. He just laughed and said, you don't think I'm going to do that, do you?
Biegenwald died in prison in 2008. He refused to ever explain his actions, meaning those who knew him have been left to speculate about why he murdered his victims.
Sometimes it was for self-protection. He felt that they may be about to give him up on something, one case. Another time it was a release that he needed.
It was an impulse that he had to satisfy, something deep within him. He showed no remorse. He killed people at a whim. I would say he was an evil man.
Unlike many serial killers, Richard Biegenwald never sought fame or notoriety for his murders. He refused invitations to tell his story to the press or to investigators. His stubborn silence has denied a sense of closure to the families of those victims who've been identified and the many who have not. Richard Biegenwald enjoyed killing. It was a way of life, a pastime, and a solution to his problems. He will be remembered in New Jersey and beyond as one of the world's most evil killers.